This is Radio Freedom, broadcasting for the very first time from cliffcentral.com on podcast. My name is Michael Schmidt. I'm a veteran journalist, and you can tell that because I've got grey in my beard. I sit on the advisory board to an entity called Radio Freedom, which is a brand new initiative out of Zimbabwe, run by a very young, lean, hungry chap by the name of Torai Mabachi, who heads up the operational side of Media and Technology Trust, which is based in Harare. And this show is called Democracy and Diversity in the Light of the Zimbabwean Coup, and we're going to be debating whether or not there was a coup, because there's dispute around that. But in the light of this military intervention that ousted President Robert Mugabe over 15 to 21 of November, what are the prospects for a transition to democracy in Zimbabwe, assisted by increased diversity of voices on its airwaves? The Zimbabwe-based Media and Technology Trust, that's MTT, of which Torai is the coordinator, campaigns to get the Zimbabwean authorities to abide by their own constitution and their own broadcasting act in licensing the more than 10 community radio stations that have been languishing off air for more than a decade to get up and running. One of those stations is MTT's own Radio Freedom initiative. So perhaps I'd turn over very briefly to Torai Mabachi, and he can give us a bit of a sketch of Radio Freedom and what it intends, and especially what its project is to open up the airwaves to community broadcasters in Zimbabwe. There is a state broadcaster currently essentially occupied by the military. There's a phalanx of commercial radio stations, so second-tier stations, but these are all affiliated or aligned to or owned by, in some way, shape or form, ZANU-PF loyalists. Community radio stations, the third tier, have not been allowed to come on air yet, and they've been languishing for quite some time. It's more than 13 years at this point. Torai, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, particularly Patrick and Daniel. The Radio Freedom is very happy to have you on its first show, because it seeks to deepen the understanding of freedom of expression, media freedom, and access to information in Zimbabwe. It actually strives to promote both online and free-to-air broadcasting. In doing so, the greatest challenge we faced relates to pushing, or should I say, encouraging the government through its through the Constitution and the Broadcasting Act to ensure that broadcasters are on air. We are so much aware of the importance of broadcasting, particularly to the day-to-day lives of the general populace in the country and in the region, as well as internationally. But in this regard, Radio Freedom would want to really start its show by addressing some of the issues that happened recently in the country, particularly the military coup, which culminated in the taking over of power by Mr. Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, who now heads what some call a renewed ZANU-PF through the military assistance. And in doing so, we would want to actually emphasize to the existing government that access to information via broadcasting is very important, especially in terms of ensuring that people understand their economic, cultural, political, and academic issues.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction, Torai. I now want to introduce our first two guests. Patrick Bond is a professor of political economy at the Wits University School of Governance. Patrick lived in Zimbabwe from time to time between 1987 and 2005, so he's got lots of on-the-ground experience. And he had opportunities to work at the University of Zimbabwe in Harare and Africa University in Mutare. He continues to support civil society organizing in Zimbabwe, and last week at the African Easy in Pambazuka wrote an essay on the worsening economic crisis. His books include his PhD dissertation, published in 1998 by Africa World Press as Uneven Zimbabwe, a study of finance, development, and underdevelopment, and co-authoring with Simba Manyanya, Zimbabwe's Plunge, Exhausted Nationalism, Neoliberalism, and the Search for Social Justice. Welcome, Patrick.
Very good to be with you. Yes, the sound quality may fade in and out, but I hope we can talk, Michael and Tarai.
Excellent, thank you so much. And alongside Patrick is Andy Moyse, who has more than 40 years experience in journalism. He came to Zimbabwe in 1980 from the BBC World Service to witness the dawn of democracy in Africa, which he was very excited about. However, he has no illusions about the current new dawn, in inverted commas. Originally, he came to work on what became the state-owned newspapers, the Herald and Sunday Mail. In 1980, he hived off and established a privately owned monthly news consumer magazine known as Horizon, acting as its editor and publisher until inflation unfortunately forced its closure in 1999. He then served a brief period as acting editor of the Standard Sunday newspaper before joining civil society as director of an information rights watchdog called the Media Monitoring Project Zimbabwe. He's currently a media consultant, and he sits on the board of trustees of Torai's Media Technology Trust. Welcome, Andy.
Andy.
Oh, sorry, we don't have Andy online at the moment. That's quite all right. We're going to call Daniel Nguira. Daniel, I have a very brief CV on him, unfortunately. He's a chartered accountant, a former bank treasurer, and former university lecturer. He holds finance and business qualifications, and he's written for various media outlets, including very recently for the Zimbabwe Independent, taking a much more up-tempo approach to the economic situation in Zimbabwe, and suggesting that, in fact, it is a phoenix preparing to rise from the ashes. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, how are you? I'm pleased to be here.
Excellent. Now, gentlemen, I suppose the starting point is really to discuss very briefly the current situation that has evolved over the past fortnight, probably one of the most dramatic fortnights in recent Zimbabwean history, and establish perhaps, first of all, is there in fact a coup?
Yes, because once the coup occurred, without doubt, the military took over the machinery of the state. The coup victim, Robert Mugabe, decided to cooperate. It wasn't clear he would. He was in a moment of denial, but it was very obvious by the time the impeachment proceedings started, which was meant to give a veneer of credibility to a transition, that Mugabe finally wrote the resignation letter. And that, in turn, is a signal that he really didn't have much more than a few men around him in the G40, his wife, and perhaps some loyalists in the CIO and the police. So it was a relatively bloodless coup, only a few casualties, mostly the bodyguards and some police. But the most important thing is that illegitimately, until the resignation after the impeachment, the real head of state was Augustino Chiwenga, and now he has put into place Emerson Mnangagwa, and these are illegitimate leaders because they are the beneficiaries of a coup, although the African Union and SADC stood by quietly and let it happen.
It seems clear that the prerogatives of these coup leaders, their initial drive was to disguise the nature of this coup, and clearly in Mugabe's resignation statement he claims that he's doing this voluntarily on behalf of the people of Zimbabwe. This is all to ensure secession, that there's no tripping up of the smooth transition to military rule by SADC or the African Union, casting doubt over its legitimacy, not so?
Yes, legitimacy is crucial because Emerson Mnangagwa has such a dreadful history as a Zimbabwean leader from the early 1980s, when his involvement in the Gukurundi massacres has been documented, the 2008 stolen election, and the violence that forced the movement for democratic change to back out in the middle of 2008, and especially more recently, the 2008 to 17 looting of the Marangi diamond fields in eastern Zimbabwe, in Manicaland, where Emerson Mnangagwa set up the original deals involving Chinese joint ventures. And President Mugabe last year said that of the $15 billion worth of diamonds that were anticipated in terms of the revenue over that period, only $2 billion is accounted for, $13 billion. And now Emerson Mnangagwa, as Zimbabwe's president, has issued a call for the looters of Zimbabwe's wealth to bring back the money. I hope he's looking in the mirror.
Patrick, before we get into the financial side of things, which I know you focus on quite significantly, let's go back to the Matabeleland massacres of the 80s. Now, I've taken a look at the report on the 1980s disturbances in Matabeleland and the Midlands, as it was called, compiled by the Catholic Commission for Justice and Peace in Zimbabwe, released in March of 1997, so quite late in the day. Mnangagwa does not really feature very prominently in the report as a key person, but of course he was, because he was in charge of the Central Intelligence Organization at that time. The report basically concludes that there were at least 3,750 dead and missing, saying it could be double that or even higher. Only further research will resolve the issue. Subsequent scholarship has suggested that the number may be as high as 20,000 dead. This report says 680 homesteads destroyed, at least 10,000 detained for a few days or for even longer over the period of 82 to 87. 99 known mass beatings, 4,950 further assaults, and at least 7,000 people who've been physically tortured. So by any measure, this was a really drastic intervention that was supposedly driven against Zipra dissidents, but had very clear ethnic overtones, and Mnangagwa has been cited elsewhere as really in sort of a foreshadowing of the terrible terminology used during the Rwandan genocide as calling for these cockroaches to essentially be stamped out. Could you perhaps comment a bit on that background and the degree to which Mnangagwa was responsible for the massacres?
Yes, indeed. You've mentioned the cockroach comment, and he said that DDT was needed, and the DDT took the form of the 5th Brigade, who had been trained by quite brutal North Koreans. So this is the sort of infamous role in which Mnangagwa was part of the key team, along with especially Sydney Sakamai. And these men were, as not only the Catholic Commission reported in its study, one of the key authors of that, Jocelyn Alexander, a professor at Oxford, recently confirmed this with me, but also in a study that Stuart Doran did. He's one of the key external scholars who's an expert. So let me just quickly quote from a piece he did very recently about Mnangagwa's involvement as CIO's head. He said, quote, along with Mugabe and the minister responsible for defense, Sydney Sakamai, none of the ZANU politicians was more embroiled in Gukurundi than Mnangagwa. He was not the architect, but he was one of them. Of that, there is no doubt, end quote. And some other evidence of that collaboration is provided by Doran. But I think the crucial thing is that this was a moment in Zimbabwe's history, as Mugabe himself called it, a moment of madness, for which Mnangagwa
which is quite breathtaking to have.
Avoiding any culpability.
Yeah. Quite breathtaking for Mugabe to have said that. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Mnangagwa himself was quoted at some point as saying it was sort of hell on earth at that time, having to go through that.
Yes, except that
also suggesting that he was sort of compelled or under coercion to participate in this.
Well, last year he was quoted by the New Statesman in an interview saying, quote, "How do I become the enforcer during Gokurahundi? We had the president, the minister of defense, the commander of the army, and I was none of that. My own enemies attacked me left and right, and that is what you are buying." So he's, end quote, he's denying his culpability, and I think some sort of, in a sense, a truth commission or some deeper investigation to restore legitimacy. Right now, he comes into power with the legitimacy of having been the army's main candidate, and of course he has a huge network. And the Lacoste faction, his nickname the Crocodile, so the Lacoste, that shirt that has a crocodile or alligator logo. Now that network went up head to head against the very powerful wife, Grace Mugabe, the very clever Jonathan Moyo, and another potential replacement, Cedric Osequera, and a few others. Ignatius Chombo, the finance minister, now in jail.
As the Generation 40 faction.
Yeah, so Mnangagwa obviously played politics very carefully to avoid the fate of Joyce Majuru, who Grace Mugabe in 2014 had dislodged as the vice president. And circumstances quite similar, because this was a sort of way to clear her out, so that then Joyce could become ZANU-PF Women's League leader and play the sort of behind-the-scenes Lady Macbeth type of manipulative role with her aging husband. And probably knew this was coming in August. It was quite clear.
Before we get into some of the really interesting mechanics behind the coup, perhaps we can now turn to the economic situation that Zimbabwe is facing, and then I can ask Daniel to respond to your perspectives on that. You're mentioning in particular the issue of donor funding and Zimbabwe's repayment of debt and the general economic crisis that it's been in for some time now, and how it may be possible for Mnangagwa to reverse this trend. Patrick?
I'm so sorry, the line has just been very fading in and out.
Right,
it may be worthwhile you calling me again. We're conducting the interview with Daniel and then coming back to me. What would be better?
Let's go to Daniel then. Daniel, in terms of the economic prospects for Zimbabwe as you see it now post coup, what are your projections? What challenges does the Mnangagwa government have to deal with?
All right. First and foremost, Emmerson Mnangagwa is facing a situation whereby there is a lot of confidence in him at the moment, despite the past that people claim to know or we all know about. I think confidence is on his side. The challenges he does face is that he has supporters within the ruling party who obviously are expecting to be part of the government. He's also facing a challenge that he has taken over a country which is broke, essentially. I think practically what is expected is that a country should have 3 months foreign currency import cover. Zimbabwe has got none at this point in time. I think you're aware of the backlogs in terms of the international payments, which must be, he has nothing at this point in time. So what he simply has is the confidence of the people. The confidence coming in, not because he has got a fantastic history as a leader, but confidence coming in the sense that people have seen the back of Robert Mugabe. And in the last few days, I must say that President Mnangagwa seemed to have struck the right chord. When you read the speech, or when you listen to the speech which he made, the inaugural speech, it is not a fantastic speech, but it is a speech which is promising to do things differently. And in the days after the inauguration, I think you will find that the announcement that he is giving those who have externalized the money 3 months to return it back, after which they will have to face jail. That particular statement on its own, it has resonated well with Zimbabweans who really and truly believe that there's been massive externalization, and there's a belief that the economy is going to face a situation whereby money is going to flow back coming from that. But he has got an advantage which he has. He is generally a feared leader, as a crocodile. Because he's so feared, the approach which he's going to make, if for as long as he makes a decision that we have to take this economy in this manner, we are likely to see compliance, especially on the part of the government officials. I must reiterate or emphasize that the people who have collapsed the economy of Zimbabwe are government officials, number one. The rest are number two. So within government, in all sectors of the country, he is a feared leader. That is what will work in his favor. Now, it is too early for us to say the economy is going to boom. We are waiting for the naming of his cabinet, which I think rumor is it that I should say, social media reports have it that he has said that he doesn't want a bloated cabinet. If he does that, and if he puts fresh names, if he is also inclusive, by inclusive, it means members of the opposition. It also means members of the public. When I say members of the public,
would this be both factions of the opposition?
Okay, let me clarify. Yes, it has to be both factions.
And
by the way, BET is part of Changirai in the MDC alliance.
We are in the Grand Alliance.
It has to be Changirai, Mujuru, Nkosana Moyo, and so on. But let me hasten to say that the 5 ministers whom he is allowed to appoint outside of the National Assembly and Senate, they need not necessarily come. Obviously, they are not supposed to be politicians. The decision that President Mnangagwa must make must be based on competence and skills, not inclusion because of the need to include. No. There are certain posts where you might need to include. The MDC has got support of the people from an economic point of view. I think if you look at what happened in 2009, if Emmerson Mnangagwa wants quick wins, he has to include members of the MDC. That is my opinion.
And would such a pluralistic cabinet then inspire donor and investor confidence, do you believe?
It depends on who in that cabinet, who he puts in there. Like I said, there are names which are well respected, like Tendai Biti. He's a well respected member of our community. I think internationally, BT has earned a good name in terms of the way he managed the finances. I don't know how he can incorporate the leader of the MDC, Morgan Changirai, who is quite respected. People have confidence in Morgan Changirai. But beyond the 2 names I'm mentioning, it is not about those names. It is about inclusivity, and it's about skills and competencies. I think you might have seen that there was an uproar on social media when the president reappointed Minister Chinamasa as the interim Minister of Finance, right? I understood that he was looking at continuity, but people don't want those old names anymore. They want people who are fresh and who have got who've got skills and competencies.
Okay,
when you mention people like Nkosana Moyo,
I've been calling this a continuity coup to assure the continuity of ZANU-PF rule. But are you suggesting that he's actually going to be feeling significant pressure from the ground to introduce a lot of fresh faces into the mix?
Definitely. In our history, we have never seen a leader who is under immense pressure as much as in President Emmerson Mnangagwa. He is the most pressured leader at this point in time, even in the history of this country. He only has up to 10 months. I think some people are suggesting up to July, but it can extend up to 10 months. He only has up to 10 months. And the reason why he's under pressure is because when it appeared that there was a stalemate somewhere, somehow, the people of Zimbabwe assisted in getting Mugabe out of office by marching on the 18th of November. Right. So that did not become a ZANU-PF project. It then became a national project where people from
that legitimized a pre-existing military action.
Exactly.
Right.
So you find that, and it is not so much about the person who was coming in. It is so much because people believed that a continued Mugabe leadership was jeopardizing the national interest of this country.
Right.
So for them to have a viable economy, they thought Mugabe goes away and anybody else who comes in is a better person than Mugabe.
There was a curious story about a year ago suggesting that the British were prepared to throw quite a lot of money behind backing Emerson for the secession to Robert Mugabe. Was there any British meddling or behind-the-scenes funding that could have led to this coup?
In my view, probably not. It was the desperation of the British to reclaim some of the lost ground and to identify a successor that they could sort of name right at the outset as their mate. And the dilemma was, as soon as this became publicly known, the ambassador was disciplined, and there was a big controversy in Britain about this. However, Boris Johnson, the foreign minister, has come out since the coup just to say, yes, we're happy. We're going to work with Emerson and Mnangagwa, and we hope we can get a deal in which we can bring them back into respectability in the international community. I translate those two words, international community, as imperialism, right? So the imperial bloc is very frayed at the moment. That's Britain and the U.S. at this moment fighting with each other because Donald Trump is such a difficult man with his extremist Islamophobia. So even Theresa May is defending Islam against Trump. And the question of how well imperialism, the EU, the Brussels apparatus in Harare has been very important. Britain and the U.S. can work together because they're facing a competitor, and that is Beijing. And what we do know is that
this is very curious.
We had
General Constantino Chiwenga meeting with the Chinese defense minister on 10th of November within days of Mnangagwa being fired and fleeing to South Africa via Mozambique. It seems from this very clearly, although there's no official comment to this effect, in fact, this is presumed or it's purported to be a regular scheduled military-to-military visit, but it seemed that essentially that the coup plotters were seeking endorsement by essentially Zimbabwe's biggest foreign investor for the coup.
I would add to foreign investor, foreign looter, because certainly the West has looted Zimbabwe, there's no doubt. But the Chinese, especially with a man called Sam Pa and his Queensway group, technically out of Hong Kong, but Sam Pa has operated out of mainland China and has operated all over Africa. And he's allegedly in jail for having attempted to corrupt one of the competitors of Xi Jinping's faction. We don't know his status after a report a year or so ago about Sam Pa, the Anjin head, and listeners who know Eastern Zimbabwe know that that was the main Sino-Zimbabwe joint venture with the army, and that Sam Pa has been very involved in financing ZANU-PF and its events. Indeed, in 2013, the ability of the army to run the operations for the election really did depend upon the Anjin diamond money loot, and much of that externalized. According to Mugabe himself, 13 billion cannot be accounted for. Is this a Chinese investor or a Chinese looter? And that would be the kind of question that the Global Times, which is China's main English-speaking
there was a significant massacre involved in dispossessing artisanal miners at the point of the gun of the army was sent in to occupy the diamond fields.
It was
Under
about
Mnangagwa.
400 to 800 in 2008 November, and the Center for Natural Resources Governance in Harare has done a good job of documenting what can be known from hospital records and the testimonials by many of the community members in Marangi and Chiadzwa especially. And I think the critical thing is that in clearing away those artisanal miners looking for diamonds in this dusty, barren part of eastern Zimbabwe, Marangi, Anjin was right there ready to sign deals for joint ventures. And so the Chinese connection, as the Global Times put it, is endorsement of Mnangagwa because they anticipate he will be more friendly to foreign investors. In other words, they were getting frustrated because at some point that lack of revenue inflow from the Marangi fields drove Mugabe to actually centralize diamonds and to stop some of the collaborations with the Chinese in eastern Zimbabwe. And now I think they're trying to restart those kinds of relations. Hopefully, from their standpoint, they don't want to see the 51% local ownership requirements. They want to have much freer access to moving foreign exchange in and out to getting their profits home. In other words, this is really a big business friendly coup that Mnangagwa is seen as the sort of neoliberal